If you're enjoying this podcast from us here at Which, then why not become a Which member? Right now, we've got a special offer, especially for podcast listeners, meaning you can choose any of our 3 membership tiers for 50% off the usual price. Starting at just £39.50 for a full year, you can get Which magazine delivered direct to your door. For the same price, you could also choose a digital Which subscription, giving you access to all of our product reviews, the Which app, and the digital edition of Which magazine. What's more, you'll also be able to use the Ask Which service for personalised one-to-one buying advice. Or why not get a full access Which subscription for just £49.50 for a full year? Don't forget, that's 50% off the usual price. To join Which or to find out more, just head to which.co.uk/podcast offer. That's which.co.uk/podcast offer, or click the link in the description for today's podcast for 50% off a Which annual subscription.
When life gives you questions, Which? Get answers.
Welcome to the Which Money Podcast, your weekly hit of money news and personal finance hacks to help make you better off. I'm your host, Lucia Ariano, and here's what's coming up this week.
While you can kind of understand why insurers within their ranges are saying we offer 3 or 4 levels of cover, they range from bronze to gold or whatever it might be. I think if you're shopping around, you probably don't want to be paying too much attention to those names as a guide, because these will lead to potentially completely different types of cover.
If you buy weeks in advance rather than last minute, you can save a significant amount of money. Go Compare, for example, indicates if you choose a policy 26 days in advance, you could potentially save an incredible 55%.
Now, a shocking number of drivers were priced off the roads by insurance costs in the year to October 2024. 900,000, according to Citizens Advice. It really is a huge number, and with prices so high, today we're going to be discussing how to get cheaper and better car insurance, with heaps of advice along the way. And joining us to explain more is the Which insurance expert, Dean Sobers. Hi, Dean.
Hiya.
And also joining us is the Director of Motoring Research and Vice Chair of the Guild of Motoring Writers, Richard Aucock. Hello, Richard.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you so much for coming in. Well, shall we start from the top? Dean, I know you've been busy lately compiling the results of our annual car insurance survey. So before we get to the results, can you just give us a little intro to it and how you do it?
Yeah, so every year we have to update our latest crop of Which recommended providers and our car insurance reviews. So what we do is we go out into the market basically, and we survey as many providers as we can get, to do a survey to find out about their policies and their policy cover levels. This year, we've gone out to 31 providers, and we've got the details of 76 policies, which we've then analysed and given them all a policy score, which basically reflects how comprehensive their levels of cover are. Then kind of at the same time, we've wanted to get the customer's perspective on how good these insurers are in practice. So we surveyed somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 customers. I think it was 4,700, and we asked them about their experiences making claims with their insurer. We put this all together, and the providers that did the best got our Which recommended provider endorsement.
And it's not just analysing policies, but it's also speaking to customers then. So why is that so important?
So I guess at the end of the day, insurance isn't so much a product as it is a service. So, so you buy it, hoping that you'll never have to use it. But if you do have to use it, you're basically entrusting that the insurer will get you through a situation where you've had an accident or something's happened, and that they'll treat you well, that you won't end up having to pay out more money than you expected. So it's really important to speak to customers who have made a claim, in our view, to get a rounded idea of how good an insurer is. So what we sometimes have is an insurer which has a policy that on paper looks brilliant, we'll give it a really high score because it seems to have really high levels of cover. But then when we speak to customers that have claimed with it, we get a different picture.
We're really getting the full picture. And Richard, you've been writing about cars for over 30 years now. Has the debate about insurance, how much it costs and what we actually get for our money, been going all that time? Or is it worse now?
It's always been a factor. Insurance has always been a challenge. It's one of the biggest motoring expenses, if not the biggest. And it's a legal requirement, so you can't avoid it, you can't escape it. It's always been a factor overall, but there are periods when it becomes more pronounced. For example, in the early 90s, when there was a car crime epidemic, insurance was a real factor then because some cars were simply uninsurable. More recently, we've had rising car prices, rising parts prices, which is all helping push up the cost of car insurance. So again, it has, over the past few years, really raised up the agenda. It's always been an issue for younger drivers. Go Compare data suggests that younger drivers' annual average premium is almost £900, which is crazy. And if you face with that as a 17 to 24-year-old, that's a huge bill to be presented with.
Well, should we talk a little bit more then about these costs? Because I've got here that we've seen data from Go Compare that says premiums peaked in 2024 after relentless rises over around 2 years. So they've peaked and now supposedly, they're coming down. I mean, do you think customers have noticed that their premiums are coming down, if they indeed are?
I don't think they have, and our evidence from reader engagement suggests that the readers certainly haven't. Prices are still extremely elevated. If it's £600 one year and it's £580 the next, that's not much of a reduction. It's still very expensive. And it's once a year hit as well, so it's painful to get that reminder or through the post or the email with your new quote. It's very expensive, and it's a real surprise. It's actually worth adding that the government itself is concerned and worried about the price of car insurance, and has actually established a new task force to help drive down these spiralling costs. It met for the first time last November, and further action is due this year, just because customers are so concerned about the excessive prices of car insurance.
And understandably so. Well, shall we get into then what our listeners can do, starting with the results of our survey? Dean, where shall we start? What are the headlines?
So I guess the headlines are that we've got 3 which recommended providers, and we've got 6 Best Buy policies. So the recommended providers are NFU Mutual, LV and Aviva. So then what we also do is we award certain policies what we call Best Buy status. And what that means is that the policies kind of stood out to us in that analysis of the cover that we do. And that when we've looked at other things such as our survey data, claims data or complaints data, we haven't seen anything there that's made us concerned that it might provide subpar service. And the policies that have received Best Buys from us have come from Allianz, LV, NFU, Aviva, First Alternative, and Sheila's Wills. And you can find out all the specifics about that on our website.
And we'll get a link to that in the description of today's show. I should firstly say that I'm quite pleased to hear you mention which recommended providers there, because when you joined us in the autumn to talk about home insurance, you revealed that there were no WRPs then. So it does seem like it's a bit brighter here for customers. There seems to be more good quality options on the market. Is that fair to say?
Where we saw kind of issues or barriers to us being able to go as far as giving home insurance which recommended providers, it was all on the sort of customer satisfaction side, that customer experience side. We just didn't get as positive feedback from home insurance claimants as we were getting from customers in this more recent car insurance survey. In terms of like the options that you get as a customer, I think that there are actually good quality products in both markets. Although I do think it is kind of worth speaking about options, and this is something that we wrote about in the magazine article. So in terms of the kinds of products that you can buy at the moment, the kinds of options that you have, there are probably bigger ranges of options available than there have been in quite a while, at least since I've been covering it. So car insurers have got different products that are lined up for you, depending on whether you want minimal cover or whether you want all of the bells and whistles. If you want your price to be determined by having like a telematics black box following you around as you're driving, if you want some of your premium to be donated to carbon offsetting schemes. And then they also have different products depending on how you buy the insurance. So if you go through a comparison site, you might wind up with a different product than you would get if you went directly. One thing that kind of strikes me about all that is that we've got all these different sort of flavors of cover that insurers are offering. And largely they're doing this, I think, to be helpful to customers. But I find it really confusing.
And Richard, with all of your experience, I'm really interested to know, when you look at the results, what stands out to you?
Well, first of all, the results table is an absolute goldmine of information. It's really impressive, and it can really help complement people who are searching on comparison sites or other means. What stands out for me is the importance of customer service. People really value having good customer service from their insurer. From claimants themselves, they also seem to really value service and speed of service. I was surprised by the fact there's such a big difference in the speed of dealing with claims between the top-rated insurers and the rest.
Should we say how long might that difference be?
So it depends on the type of claim. So some customers will report that they've had their claim has kind of been dealt with, processed sort of the day that they've reported it. You've got other customers that will write in and say they've been involved in some sort of protracted dispute that's gone on for, as long as years. And this can especially be the case if there's, for instance, if there's two disputing parties. So if there's two drivers involved or more, and that's all trying to be ironed out. All this being said, there have actually been quite a lot of complaints made to the Financial Ombudsman Service about delays in service. So it is actually quite a big concern in the sector at the moment.
And so you just mentioned the speed. Is there anything else? Sorry, I did cut you off there.
Oh, no. Some of the other features of the Best Buy policies and the which recommended providers really stood out to me. Repairs being guaranteed for as long as you own the car, for example, 6 months of overseas cover, and generous protection for no claims discount all seem to be very valuable features. It also struck me that for some of the below average policies, they don't protect your no claims discount, which for me is a real must have. Some of them also don't include glass or windscreen cover, but which readers say that the second most common claim is windscreen damage. So it seems to me a really important feature to have in car insurance. And if it's not there, it seems to be a striking omission.
Such a lot to consider there. Well, as I mentioned, we will drop a link to the best and worst car insurance providers in the description of today's show. Now, after the break, we'll be unpacking the results some more and giving you the best tips on how to cut the cost of your insurance premiums. We'll be back after this.
If you're enjoying this Which podcast, then you might also be interested in listening to other podcasts that we have to offer, like Which Shorts. Which Shorts is our weekly podcast that brings you a flavour of what the Which magazine has to offer, as well as our dedicated travel, gardening and tech magazines too. Each week we handpick a review, investigation or feature that was printed in one of our magazines and written by one of our award-winning writers. We then bring it to life on the podcast. So, to get a taster of what Which members get in our suite of magazines, be sure to listen to Which Shorts wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to the show. Now, I just want to start by looking at some of the words used in policy names because it seems a bit complicated. Surprise, surprise. Now, Dean, in your piece that you wrote for the Which magazine, you wrote that we shouldn't be looking out for words like gold or platinum. Why is that?
So insurers have these naming conventions to kind of identify certain policies as being of a particular standard. So they might have a policy that they call essentials, which obviously suggests that it's going to be a fair price for the basic kind of cover that you need. And then kind of at the other end of the scale, they might have policies that are called platinum or something like that, which obviously kind of suggests that it's going to be the best cover that's available. You might pay a bit more for it, but it'll be money well spent if you're after, absolute peace of mind. But what we find when we kind of review and compare these policies is that there's really no consensus between different insurers on their ideas of what these levels of cover should include or not include. So we were talking a little bit earlier about some policies that, for instance, don't include windscreen cover. So you get this with some essentials policies. But some essentials policies do include it and some don't. For some customers, that's probably going to be an absolute must-have, whereas for other customers, they might be okay with with accepting that they'll have to pocket any damage to their windscreen or windows. But then what we also find is that, so for example, in the policies that we've reviewed, we've got one policy here that's a platinum, which has less comprehensive cover than another policy from another provider that's called essentials. So while you can kind of understand why insurers within their ranges are saying we offer 3 or 4 levels of cover, they range from bronze to gold or whatever it might be. I think if you're shopping around, you probably don't want to be paying too much attention to those names as a guide, because between different insurers these will lead to potentially completely different types of cover.
It does make it so difficult for the consumer, doesn't it? And the word essential that you just said, that's being used a lot more as well. I mean, Richard, are insurers doing this deliberately to make it more confusing?
I think it's a way that insurers can offer different prices and different levels of cover by having policies with different things included. I see it rather like buying a new car, where you have different levels of equipment and different specifications. They can be the same for one manufacturer. They're not the same for different manufacturers. So it does vary across the board. It can lead to everyday confusion. For example, you may assume that if you've got one policy that you have insurance that covers you to drive another car, but it may not be the case if you're just basing it on these strange names that cause so much confusion. I think it's definitely worth considering whether a cheaper price up front is worth it, if a higher excess further down the line could lead to surprises. And that's the sort of thing that these different levels and different tiers of policy can certainly cause confusion with.
And reading through all of these policies, it takes time, doesn't it? So when it comes to needing to renew or to get a new policy, do we just need to give ourselves more time, rather than rushing through and picking a policy based on gold or platinum quickly? Absolutely.
I think, give yourself as much time as possible. What I do is set myself a reminder. There are various apps that can help here. You enter the renewal date for your current car insurance policy, and the app does the work. It sends you a reminder a month or 6 weeks in advance. I also find that useful for MOT and tax as well, because everything is paperless. Going through the list of features does take time, and as we say, particularly with all these different essential and gold and platinum policies, but it's certainly time well spent in understanding just what you're getting for your money. And also by giving yourself time, there is the potential to genuinely get a cheaper premium. Evidence suggests that if you buy weeks in advance rather than last minute, you can save a significant amount of money. Go Compare, for example, indicates if you choose a policy 26 days in advance, you could potentially save an incredible 55% on the cost of the policy, rather than if you did it last minute.
I was pleased when you mentioned they're setting an alarm for, say, 6 weeks ahead, because that's something that we've done a lot of work at Which on, Dean, isn't it? Basically not renewing on the day, because you might end up paying a heck of a lot more.
It's kind of it's a finding that is kind of shown again and again and again. If you renew last minute, you could end up paying, potentially hundreds of pounds more than you might have paid if you renewed a few weeks in advance. Timing can actually make quite a big difference with buying car insurance. So one thing that we also found quite recently was that if you renew in the middle of the night, you might end up, some insurers will actually put up their prices by, as much as by doubling it. So time, some are actually quite sensitive to all sorts of things around timing. But I think the big one is to make sure you don't do it last minute.
Well, let's get into then how to get the best cover. What are the steps that we need to actually take? Dean, where would you like us to start here?
So I guess my big tips would be, what I always suggest is that kind of step one, if you're kind of shopping around for cover, is to just make a list of the elements of cover that are must-haves for you, and then also the elements of cover that you would just expect to be there in the insurance. Step 2 would be, it's a bit of a cheeky plug, but check our tables at which.co.uk. We've done our analyses of the comprehensiveness of cover in different policies, and then also how different insurers compare when they're put to the test during claims. Then we think that you should do a shopping around exercise every year. Even if you're happy with your insurer, it's worth shopping around every year. Just look for quotes. You can probably do this in like 20 minutes or so on a comparison website. If for no other reason, it just gives you an idea of what your insurer's rivals are willing to offer you as a price, so that you can get an idea as to whether the renewal offer that you've got from your current provider is a reasonable one or not. Step 4, if you think you're paying a price that, perhaps it's risen quite a lot in the past year, or it seems out of step with what you're seeing, with other providers, then haggle. Now, we kind of say this one again and again, and the reason we say it again and again is because we're always finding, whenever we look into it, that people who do haggle are usually able to negotiate some sort of a reduction in their price without too much effort. You don't have to be like a really, really kind of strong negotiator to be able to do it. You just have to call up, just say that you're unhappy with the price as it is. Sort of ask them to explain why it's gone up, if it's gone up. And then if you've done that kind of research, looking around for other quotes, kind of say what you're being offered elsewhere. A lot of the time, this can kind of lead to a discussion which can result in a discount. And then the last one would be if you're switching, or if you're getting a new insurance policy, just refine and double check. So you're happy with the price, you're happy with the shape of the product. Hopefully you've checked the policy wording, but basically go back to that list check that you made at the beginning, if you followed our tips, and just check if everything there is kind of explicitly mentioned in the policy wording. Because if it isn't, then there's a good chance that it actually won't be part of the policy, even if it seems like common sense that it should be.
So much there. Let's unpick a couple of those. And you came back to the list at the end. Richard, let's pass this one over to you. Can you give us some advice on, when it comes to listing what you want, then finding a policy that suits, what should we be looking for? And I suppose this also includes looking at things like loss of personal belongings, where we could be paying for cover already elsewhere.
Exactly. It's certainly worth spending that time and go through the small print and seeing what's included and what isn't. Personal belongings can often be included on home insurance, or if not included, it can be an optional extra. Sometimes travel insurance can include it as well. It's also worth bearing in mind that personal belongings, if it is included on car insurance, often has a cap in terms of value. So if you've got particularly expensive possessions like a smartphone or an expensive watch, the full value probably won't be covered by personal belonging insurance. So it's worth considering separate insurance for that anyway.
One thing that it's probably not going to be apparent when you're kind of just checking sort of like the different cover levels is that when it comes to personal possessions, there are quite a few policies have exclusions under that cover for things like phones or laptops or tablets. So there might be things that you kind of assume would just naturally fall in there because of the English language. It's a personal possession. But again, kind of in those exclusions in the terms and conditions, it'll turn out they're not there. So you might need some other form of cover, like your personal possessions with your home insurance, to cover it. And
another point I just wanted to come back to that you already mentioned, Dean, and it's haggling, because it is such a big deal and it's so worth doing. We say it time and time again. Richard, what's your advice here? What would you say is the best approach?
Always haggle. Amazingly, again, Go Compare suggests that just over 1 in 3 Brits haggle, and people are far more likely to haggle over broadband and TV than car insurance, even though car insurance can potentially be much more expensive. The tips that I often follow are to use a comparison site and get some examples to use in the phone call with your insurer.
And I suppose it doesn't necessarily have to be a phone call. Could it potentially be an online chat? Do they exist in this realm too?
Yeah, so some people will haggle over the phone, others will do it, doing an online chat, or it might be an email process, just any way of just getting in touch with the insurer and just signalling that you kind of want a discussion about the price.
So you've done your research, you've got your examples, you're speaking to someone, what next?
When you speak to somebody, the first person you speak to might be in customer service, and they perhaps aren't able to make a decision or vary the insurance cost. So it's important to try and get through to the retentions department, because they are empowered to make a decision about how much you will pay. That might require a transfer in a phone call or a transfer online. It's just something to be aware of. I also say to people, be friendly, put a smile on your face, think of the money that you might be saving in the first instance, point out the low prices elsewhere, and it's also worth seeing if your current insurance provider is on a comparison site, because sometimes you can get a cheaper premium for your current insurance for a comparison site than your renewal quote through the post, which is eye-opening in the extreme. Tell them that you're prepared to go elsewhere, ask them to justify the price, point out that you're a loyal customer, and if they won't budge at all on the price, it's perhaps worth considering asking for free add-ons, such as breakdown cover. So even though you're not getting a cheaper price, you're getting more thrown in for free into that premium.
And you mentioned your current provider there. We have to talk about whether it's ever worth auto-renewing with your current provider, because I know we've spoken a lot just over the years on frankly that they tend to be higher prices.
I guess if you do just auto-renew, then you won't have been through by definition, you won't have been through a process of negotiating that price with the provider. So the odds are it probably will be higher than what you could actually obtain. And then, as Richard was just hinting at, sometimes you can find better prices from your insurer by going by getting the same cover through a comparison site. I think it's a fairly safe, it's a sensible assumption that if you are auto-renewing, you're not getting the best price from your insurer that you could be.
And Dean, we should also just mention we do have a petition around car insurance, don't we? Can you just tell us a bit more about that?
So for a while now, we've been pointing out areas where we think the insurance industry isn't serving consumers to an acceptable standard. And these range from how it handles claims, to the kinds of interest rates that it charges to customers that pay monthly. So what we're doing now is we're campaigning about this. And we're trying to put pressure on the regulator to in turn pressure the industry into upping its game. So we need you to help us, basically. So we've got a website about our campaign, which we'll provide you with a link to at the end of this. And on there is a petition. Currently about 100,000 people have signed it, but the more the better, the more pressure we can kind of exert. Basically my plea is, at the very least, have a look and see what we're doing and see what we want to accomplish. And then if you want, help us.
Extremely worthwhile. So do get involved, and we'll pop a link in the description of today's show. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. It's been an epic show. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, a huge thank you again to Dean and Richard for coming on the show today, and to you for listening to this week's episode of the Which Money Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please do hit subscribe to make sure you catch our new episodes as soon as they drop. For daily money news and advice, you can find us on social media at Which Money and online at which.co.uk/money. And we also have a free money newsletter which is delivered to your inbox every Monday. To sign up, visit which.co.uk/money newsletter. This episode of the Which Money Podcast was presented by me, Lucia Ariano, and produced and edited by James Rowe.
With so many sales on these days, how do you know when you've seen a good deal? We make it easier by trawling through the deals for you to find genuinely good prices on genuinely good products, all packaged up into a free monthly newsletter. Using internal pricing data and our own market knowledge, we keep an eye on price changes and let you know whether a product is at its cheapest point. From bargains on TVs to discounts on laptops, the products we share have all been put under the Which microscope, meaning we only recommend deals on items we know work well. Our expert advice cuts through the noise to share reductions and reviews which we think will interest you. So make sure you sign up for our brand new Deals newsletter to help you grab the genuine bargains. Just head to which.co.uk/WP_deals. That's which.co.uk/WP_deals.